This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA.
Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Just fresh off of the holidays. I'm sure everybody is fully stuffed with the turkey and the ham. And now we're transitioning ourselves to probably the most wonderful time of the basketball season, which is Christmas time. But before we get there, obviously, we got to kind of bring everything full circle with what's going on with the NBA as we speak, right? So who none better to break down everything that's been going on, you know what I'm saying? Because it's been a while since the dynamic duo has been together because one of us has been gallivanting around the globe.
Why gotta be gallivanting?
Most joyously, though. Most joyously. My man, Mr. Warren Shaw, ripping out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. What's good, brother? Welcome back to the fold, my friend.
Yeah, man. We back up in this piece. Getting back to more of the regularly scheduled program. Great guests, great show last week too with Mr. Andrew Bernstein. But talk a little bit of these hoops. We haven't had a chance to talk hoops since I've been back, so we'll get back into a little bit of that. And ironically, I'm going against the grain here for your theme here because it's supposed to be a holiday cheer, but we're going to be a little bit of curmudgeons here, talking about some panic levels, talking about some negative things happening or perceived to be negative things happening around the association, my guy.
I mean, by the time that we finish this show, I'm sure everyone's going to have PTSD, right? So,
yes, sir.
Panic is going to be kind of repurposed and reused into something different, right? So, yeah. So we got a great show on tap, man. I'm sure, like those of us who've been kind of watching what's been happening, as far as the NBA season goes, you've been paying attention to a couple of trends that's been taking place, and I think if you're not a fan of those particular teams, but you are a fan of what's trending, um, maybe you and I and everyone else has are feeling some kind of way about whether or not these teams or particular individual or certain scenario requires a level of panic that's involved. So we will have our panic level assessments taking place on this week's show. And as always, we appreciate everybody for hopping on board with us this week. Be sure to get my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA or get at me at Game Face Lee, the show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline, available on all the major platforms. You know where to find us. Just go to www.nba baselinenba.com. See, already panicking right now because I can't get the words out my mouth, bro. But be sure to head out to the website in order to catch our episode and all of our previous episodes. That's the home where the baseline resides. And then also, if you're catching us on YouTube channel, you know that we rocks with the 19 Media Group family. So be sure to go to www.19mediagroup.com to catch our show and the family of great shows that pretty much covers the gamut of whatever your listening pleasure is: music, entertainment, culture, sports, you name it. 19 Media Group has got it. So definitely go out to the website, show some love and support, subscribe to some channels, listen, I'm saying, get educated, I'm saying, because we are the educators. So, all right, Shaw. So let's get right into it, man. So, this has been a very interesting, close to quarter of an NBA season, right? Now, I've been wanting to get your take on this because I know that we've had our conversations a little bit about what our expectations were in regards to the in-season tournament. But I'm just curious because I don't think I've had the opportunity to ask this question, and even when we've had some of our special guests, who filled in while you were away, you know, I don't recall me asking the question directly, but I'm going to ask you directly. Do you think that the in-season tournament in any way, shape, or form has impacted what we're seeing from the first quarter of the NBA season?
As we record today, not really.
Mm.
But I wouldn't say that's holistic. There are a few teams who I think are bought in and really want to compete and try to win something here, whether that be for the bragging rights, the money, all of the above. There are a handful of teams that I think are into this. I think Indiana's into this. I think Orlando, especially now for a recent in-season tournament win against the Celtics, they felt like, hey, we have a chance to kind of do something. So for these younger teams that are on the quote unquote come up, I think there's a little bit more swag to it and a little bit more fervor. But for some of those other teams that quote unquote have their eyes on a bigger and obviously the grander prize of the Larry O'Brien, maybe not just yet. But once we get into the contention play, rather not the contention play, but
Knockout round.
out of the pool play, but into the quarterfinals, semifinals, etc. We'll see if those teams that are there start to give a little bit more of a little bit more of an issue, if you will, than they have so far going into it. But I think again, like some of those younger teams have shown some real propensity to give a damn about what's happening in the in-season tournament.
Yeah, I think that was one of the things that I wanted to, make sure that was being highlighted. I think when I was given my assessment of the in-season tournament, that I don't know if whether or not I've completely bought into what the tournament was supposed to do, except for maybe provide a platform or a showcase for the teams that don't get enough prime time sunlight, right?
Yeah.
And so I think seeing these teams like the Pacers, like the Magic, even the Sacramento Kings, who I think are they have elevated themselves in a tier level of being close to a must see type team, as long as they maintain competitiveness in that gauntlet of a Pacific division. So there's opportunities there that what they're doing or trying to do via through the in-season tournament is give themselves a little bit more, spotlight. And I think that's a good thing. But I was really curious about where you were, what your take was from that show, because it just seems like there is so much hype and so much momentum. But I don't know if it's natural in the sense of the way that the game has been played competitively and the
Mm.
outcomes and the situation, as much as it is, just the timing of it and where teams are and where the tournament is, if it's manufactured or if it's truly organic. And it was interesting because when we were talking about panic level, I was almost going to throw in-season tournament. Where would you have it on the panic level of hype?
I mean,
It's-
that's ironically, that's a great question to think for Adam Silver and the tournament makers, right?
yeah.
Do they feel like they're getting the yield that they want from this?
Hmm.
Has there been the crowd response? And numbers can always tell a story, and I think numbers can be skewed to tell the story. I think some degree
Exactly.
from publications, media, whatever you want to call it. Some would say propaganda that I think has been out there. This season tournament has been a hit, but I think they're going to fine tune this. It was shocking to begin with, like shocking in the courts and all of that. Like that was just, it was visually like, what is happening here? But now as we get towards the nitty gritty and get into the kind of the knockout rounds, if you will, we'll see if that even picks up in terms of that level of interest, as I alluded to earlier, but also just the level of play as well too, as teams say, hey, you know what, well, we're here, why don't we go try to win this thing?
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think that, listen, I think there's potential, but I do think that for the sanctity of us appreciating the season that you create and the game, and what the tournament's supposed to do, there's definitely going to have to be some changes. And I don't think these are changes that like, well, we'll give it another year. No, no, no. You need to make these changes immediate, and it needs to happen so we can really appreciate the pool play, and we can appreciate the timing of it as well too. But that's a conversation for another time.
Yep.
Shaw, let's get right into our panic level assessment, right? So the first team, or I guess or the first topic of conversation to assess, you know, panic level, the Memphis Grizzlies. You know, I think coming into this situation or into the season, Shaw, when we were giving our preseason, predictions, we were a little, hesitant, to buy in whether or not, the Memphis Grizzlies were going to be competitive. And then, obviously the unfortunate circumstance of Steven Adams going down, which I really think has been the more significant impact to this team and what we're seeing, from them. And, I know all eyes are on, John Morant's suspension and what will this team look like when he comes back. But I just think that this team was broken far before we came into this season, and maybe the only thing left that could probably hold it together or maintain or stabilize it, as crazy as it sounds, is the presence of a Steven Adams. And maybe, you know what I'm saying, like that old school, old ODB mentality type person. You know what I'm saying? The grunge, the person, the glue that kind of holds that thing together, kind of like the Draymond of their team, so to speak. Him going down, I think, has really impacted this team, and then you can just see them going through the struggle. So, what is your panic level when we talk about the Memphis Grizzlies?
Well, for our fans, we're going basically levels 1 through 4. 1 being calm, not panicked at all, with 4 being severe. I might put this on past severe. This is a Busta Rhymes extinction level event. What the F is happening in Memphis? They have no idea of how to play basketball in the way that got them so much attention in the years past. And to their, not to their credit, but to take them off the schneid a little bit, they have had a lot of injuries. Obviously, the jaw situation with him just being out in general, as you alluded to, Steven Adams. Even Xavier Tillman started the year off and he got hurt. Marcus Smart has been hurt now, is out for a couple weeks. It's just like it's thing after thing after thing. Santi Aldama started the season on the shelf and came back and is playing relatively well for them now, but it's not translating. They can't score the basketball with any level of consistency. And one of the things we hear a lot about is being stars in your proverbial role. And Desmond Bane is not supposed to be the star of this basketball team. He's doing the best he can to be the leading man while everybody else is out. But having to be the lead guy, the absolute guy on this team alongside Jaren Jackson Jr. to a lesser degree, I think it's just kind of miscast. And while they've had success in the past, years past, when Ja's been out, that has just not translated to start the season in any capacity, especially with all the injuries. So they can't just have a next man up because, they just continue to have next man down. And I believe it was Shams who reported that they actually got some sort of injury exemption because they literally had like 9 guys on the injury report at one time, and they just didn't have enough guys to field a team. So they're already into the 2-way market and 10-day contracts or whatever, just getting bodies off the street to be able to play. Taylor Jenkins has a lot to figure out here. I don't believe it's all his fault per se in any capacity. The injuries have a lot to do with this, but they have got to find a way to fabricate offense and obviously get better defensively as well too. But it's just been a slog here, and I don't know that they're going to be able to recover and make even a run at a play-in at this point. 3-13 at 3-13 as we record here today. It's going to be tough sledding here for these Grizzlies.
So I think it really depends on how you want to assess the short term and the long term effect of the Memphis Grizzlies, right? So to me, I think if we're talking about this in the immediate season and what the expectations were, even counting Ja Morant, I agree with you. I think we're definitely level 4 and beyond when we talk about the Memphis Grizzlies. But because of what happened to Ja Morant, and then let's not forget too, they offloaded Dylan Brooks, right? And I think doing that propelled this mentality that the Memphis Grizzlies are going to be all right with Ja Morant, Jaren Jackson Jr., Desmond Bane, and the rest of the supporting cast. And I think because of what has taken place, to your point, I thought, and I'm sure everyone thought, that while Ja Morant was out, Jaren Jackson Jr. was supposed to be the man. But as you can clearly see, he still has not elevated himself in a way that makes it seem like he is, 1B player to Ja Morant. It still feels like Ja Morant and whoever's in that backcourt are 1A, 1B, and Jaren Jackson Jr. with his defensive prowess and the other, things that he does in shooting the three and being a versatile, big, so to speak. He's kind of like a 2-way player, and really for this team to feel that level of excitement, I don't think it was supposed to filter through Desmond Bane as much as it's supposed to filter through Jaren Jackson Jr., which surprises me because with Steven Adams out, you would think that Jaren Jackson Jr.'s presence would, be, like massive. You know what I'm saying? And we're
Well,
just not seeing that.
he's got a little bit of the Anthony Davis syndrome to him, where he's a big who
Yes,
doesn't really want to be a big. He doesn't want to play the 5. So hence they tried Tillman to start the year. Then they signed Bismack Biyombo, I think, for the rest of the year after they got, the exemption for Steven Adams. And Biyombo is now playing, the center position, and his skill set suits that, but allows Jackson to kind of stay at the 4. It's
Bro,
one of
you
those
gotta
old situations where we've seen many times, like, hey, you're better off. The team is better off if you play more 5. He just doesn't want to. So the team is acquiescing to that,
right.
especially while Jaw is out. And it's just not translating.
Right. So yeah. So listen, I think you just said it right there. The moment that a team has to play Bismack Biyombo as their starting center because their star front court player refuses to show a level of versatility required to play what's necessary for the team to be successful, I think tells you everything that you need to say. So to your point, Shaw, this is why I could easily tilt this to the severe level because I think that this is a far deep-rooted problem moving forward. And if you're asking Taylor Jenkins to handle this, how can it be handled when you can clearly tell that the personalities on this roster seems to, take up the oxygen in the room, so to speak. You know what I'm saying? So to that point, but if we were to say this is a throwaway season, so to speak, because of all of the circumstances that have arisen due to this, that this is going to be a 2-year, 3-year plan, then I would consider this a mild panic level because it's all going to come down to what version of John Morant returns to the Memphis Grizzlies and how successful will they make this season be. Not even if it's about playoffs, but showing that they could be competitive down the stretch, be spoiler to some teams, whatever the case may be. Maybe, pan out and see if some of these two-way players or whatever can take up certain starting minutes and role minutes and things of that nature, because there's going to be contractual situations that have to be addressed in this offseason for some of the players who you feel bad for that their injuries are kept them out of the lineups. But do you think that they're going to be competitive with the dynamic shift that's now taking place with the way rosters have been flipped in the Western Conference? So I think that's what, to me, is what led me to say this is more mild because I didn't expect this Memphis Grizzlies team to still have the same kind of oomph and impact the moment some of their key players have either been offloaded or have gone down to injury, rather than the focus just being about John Morant.
Well, I mean, I think that's kind, right? So if you qualify the reason they're in the predicament that they're in, then sure, right? Yeah, you can't expect to have a winning record when you don't have real NBA guys that were even on your training camp roster now playing significant minutes for you. But I think the situation is the situation, right? And so to me, it is severe in the aspect of like now you're asking Jaw, he's still 9 to 10 games away from coming back. So if they go whatever 2-7, in those 9 games, now you're talking, 14 games under 500. Like, it's rough. It's really, really rough to try to come back from that. And yes, they have the capability when healthy and when right to rip off, 7 out of 9, but they'll have to do that multiple times in essence just to kind of get back to the mean here in a Western Conference that is different than we expected. It's still very competitive, but it's very different. And I think there's a couple teams, we'll talk about another time, but like the Minnesotas and the OKCs that have taken a leap at this early part of the season that we didn't actually expect them to take, at this stage.
Right. Absolutely. You're tuned to the Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Shaw, next team that we want to talk about, the Golden State Warriors. So the Golden State Warriors started off pretty hot in the beginning of the season, right? I think won the first 6 out of 8 games that they played.
Yeah.
Now this is a team, that has only won 2 out of its last 8, I believe, right? So this is a team that is clearly struggling. What do you have as your panic level for the Golden State Warriors?
So because it's Steph, I'm going to go with the 2 and say I'm mild. I'm not completely calm, but I'm, I've raised my brow because of the age factor. Draymond, while we're recording, he'll probably be back by the time this actually comes out, but in the midst of a 5-game suspension for his, continued antics, like he just continues to be on one. Listen, Jordan Poole's gone, bro. Like, what are we doing? So, and he's just going to say, I'm Draymond and I'm never going to change. Yeah, all right, cool. But now you're on the bench, you're not able to help your team. And, Clay is struggling. Wiggins is struggling. It's just not the Warriors that I think we were expecting coming into this season. Now, again, they're just a game under 500 here as we have this conversation because they did start off so hot. Curry's missed some time, with the knee sprain. he's back in the fold. So that's why I'm going to say, I'm mildly concerned, only because the age is starting to catch up to them. The window is absolutely closing. I don't care what anybody says. Just Father Time is completely undefeated here.
Right.
And they're just showing some signs of, not being as dominant. Especially, I don't really know what's happening with Wiggins, but to them, there's signs for this to turn around. And Chris Paul still, right? He's still on this roster, hasn't really played his best basketball, has not really shooting the ball, and definitely not shooting with confidence. So all these things I think are something that can get better for Golden State in the short term and ultimately make them viable when the playoffs come around.
Yeah, so I'm gonna. It's interesting. You have things at like the most drastic level, and then I had things relatively calm, and now you're relatively calm, but I think this is severe. Um,
Really?
I think that this is severe for a couple of reasons. I don't know if whether or not these reasons have been particularly addressed, but I hear the rummagings and the conversations and banters. When I listen to different podcasts and different sports shows. Here's the thing. So it's a couple of moving parts. The first thing is to your point about Draymond Green. With Draymond Green, there's always two sides to his game, right? There's the physical and there's the mental. He's really leaning in on the mental. And I wonder if part of it is because I just think that he knows that physically he's not going to be able to sustain doing what he's been doing over the last few years, just playing at a very high level and showing defensive versatility for this team. I don't think that he can't match up with the bigs the same way that he can. And it's not a question of, you know, preventing the other team from scoring. It's preventing the other team from imposing their will on a team that refuses to get bigger. Because then by doing that, your Draymond Green becomes out of place. He becomes non-existent. You know what I'm saying? I think there's a reason why Kevon Looney still stays on this roster. He's
Mm.
not your typical big, right? And even now you can clearly see he is a limited big in situations where teams have drastically changed their strategy and their rosters to defeat a team like the Golden State Warriors. So the key has to be Draymond Green because of everyone on that basketball court who can defensively change the dynamic of how this team needs to play. It's going to wind up being Draymond Green. It's not going to be Wiggins. You can clearly see he's still dependent on the team to be that kind of person. He still needs, Steph Curry and Chris Paul and everyone else to facilitate his ability to show how dynamic a player he is. He can't do that on his own, and he never has, and he probably never will. Okay, so that to me is one problem. The other problem is Klay Thompson. And I hate to say this because I love Klay Thompson. I love seeing him when he is on one, when he's on. It's beautiful to watch him play. Sometimes it's beautiful to watch him play more than watching Steph Curry play because he proves to you time and time again that while he is not the most athletic person, he's the most determined person and he's the most sound person. But you can tell over the last couple of years, he's been playing on edge. And I don't know if that's been impacted by the injuries that he suffered and the opportunities that have fallen short, where the Warriors could have had maybe 5 championships, 6 championships in this time span. And it's getting to him. To your point, I think Father Time is speaking to him, but you can clearly tell that he is not the same player when he's on the court on both sides of the basketball. And when one side of it is not clicking, the other side seems to suffer more. That never was the problem with Klay Thompson. And unfortunately you can't afford to do that with this team. That's because the window and the room for error is so small. So I think there's just so many moving dynamic parts here. And it's not even just about the window, Shaw. It's about the level of competitiveness. The one thing that you can call on with the Golden State Warriors is their ability to score the basketball. Look at how they're struggling to score the basketball. It just doesn't come as easy as it has been in previous years. And their ability to move the ball. We were saying, oh, they're reckless with the basketball. They turn the basketball over. Well, they improved on that. Is that translating to wins? I stand corrected. It clearly doesn't because now they can't shoot the basketball. Oh, but they can't rebound the basketball well. And
Mm.
so all of this stuff is now starting to come to light, right? And I think if you are Steve Kerr, you really have to start taking stock, right? A lot of people are saying, you're not giving Kaminga minutes, you're not giving Moody minutes, blah, 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 blah. I think that the dynamic of this roster and this belief of still running the same four. Like, you remember when the Yankees, had their core four. There came a point where the Joe Torres and the Joe Girardis had to change things up in order to, one, preserve the legacy and the greatness of some of the players, and also to make sure that they were good when it mattered the most. And I think Steve Kerr still has yet to figure out how to start relying on that younger lineup to go out there and produce. Maybe take a few L's at the expense of them being competitive towards the end of the year. But that to me is, I think, the biggest outcry when I see the Golden State Warriors is they're still stuck in being the Warriors of 2015, 2014, and they're not thinking about the Warriors in 2023 with a completely different playing field that they have to overcome if their expectations are to try to win a championship.
Well, I'll just say this, with no Bob Myers in the fold, this is a vastly different, I think,
Absolutely. That's
dynamic,
another big
to
thing.
how they want to operate. And say what you want. I mean, he's the one who drafted Kuminga. He's the one who drafted Moody, guys, Wiseman instead of LaMelo Ball. And, it's an interesting situation that they're left in here now. And with Mike Dunleavy Jr., his first move is, to to get rid of Jordan Poole, after, things,
Which wasn't a bad thing. It needed to happen.
We'll talk about
But
Jordan later on, but I think, you're just looking at a roster that is a team that is completely in transition. And they don't have the horses, lined up in the stable in the Kumingas and the Moody's of the world to come out here and ready to take the reins. Like the reason those guys aren't getting minutes while people are clamoring for them is, well, I think Kerr just doesn't think they're good. And while you have Curry on this roster, I guess you can't really be fiddling around trying to alternate in this multiversal timeline, trying to do what you have and what you used to do and try to develop these guys in a really meaningful way. I think Kerr is really struggling with that to some degree, but I don't know that Kuminga or Moody have stepped up to the proverbial plate to force his hand in any capacity. Your point about Clay is extremely valid. Career low in shooting percentage, career low in points here right now. Wiggins just has fallen off a cliff, as I alluded to earlier before. So yes, these things can get better. Sarek, I think, has probably been the biggest surprise for them. So, of all the Warriors,
Well, I
was like,
thought
oh,
should
I
have been
didn't
on
really
the
expect
outside.
anything.
Like, I saw him the first couple of games. I didn't even think he was going to still be on the roster. He struggled so much, and yet right now he's probably their best player next to Steph Curry.
Yeah,
You
I
know,
mean, I think relatively speaking, right, compared to
Mhm.
what expectations were, he's probably
Exactly.
exceeded some of those or whatever. And Chris Paul, to some degree, I mean, he's still getting you 7, almost 8 assists a night, but just looks a little bit listless out there in these first 17 games or so. So I'm not
I
going
hate
to
saying this,
panic like
Shaw.
the way you are, but yeah, I definitely have my eyebrow raised. But I'm mildly concerned only because they do have Steph Curry, and I feel like, hey, they'll always have a chance and try to figure things out and turn it around.
And again, just as it is to have, someone like Steph Curry to, dress up, you know what I'm saying, what seems to be ugly, it's when you pull the covers from underneath and you realize just, how bad it probably has been or it's getting. You know what I mean? And I think
Yeah.
that's the problem that I have a little bit with the Warriors is they've kind of gotten away with this for so long. And I think now it can ultimately rear its ugly head. And I'm not talking about in comparison to the championships. I just think as far as, what this team and the direction this team is going to go, it can look very and vastly different. If say Steph Curry is gone for an extended period of time, then what do you really have? And the only way that you're going to know that is, to your point, Steve Kerr has got to stop coddling the comfortable. Like, I think he needs to start making things uncomfortable so that you can really assess which guys truly still want to be about trying to get this chip and which guys, are basking in the glow of the greatness that they've already laid out. Like, guys don't feel like they're starving. The only person who I think is obviously starving is a guy like Chris Paul. And I'm sure he's chomping at the bit saying, I want to change some junk, and some guys might not like it, but if we start winning, who's going to tell me differently? Right.
Yeah.
So all right, you're tuned to the baseline. Callie Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Coming up, we continue our panic level discussions. We got the Bulls, we got JP, Detroit Pistons. Man, you do not want to miss out. But first, if you like using debit over credit, I just learned about something that's definitely a game changer. It's called Discover Cashback Debit. It's a checking account that rewards everyone cashback on everyday purchases, which means you can get cashback on tickets for the game, snacks, team merch, all with no fees, making this season a total win. Check out eligibility and terms at discover.com/cashback debit. cashback. I'm sorry, discover.com, Discover Bank, member FDIC. More baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw. Don't go away. We are back, Cali Warren Shaw Baseline NBA podcast, and we are doing our panic level assessment of stuff that's been happening, teams in the NBA, and things that have been going on in the NBA. Shaw. So let's go ahead and continue our panic level discussion. The Chicago Bulls. Where are you on your panic level assessment with the Chicago Bulls?
Yeah, I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go a little level 3 here. Uh, it's it's concerning in the fact that Zach LaVine is giving us Eric Bledsoe vibes. Doesn't
Mm.
not sure he wants to be here. Um,
Where's Eric Bledsoe, by the way?
not
Oh,
here
okay.
in the NBA.
Okay.
But even DeRozan, who's been pretty steady for them, been really good for them since coming over there. He struggled to start the season. A lot of conversation whether or not Billy Donovan has the ear of this team. Has he lost the locker room? He and Levine apparently have already bristled, and that's part of the reason why Levine wants to get up out of here potentially, or at least exploring it. I think Vucevic continues to just be steady and just trying to be Switzerland in the whole situation, but it's just not translating to W's in the way that I think the Bulls obviously were expecting to be able to at least be competitive this year. I don't think they had designs of even being a top 4 team in the Eastern Conference, but could you show some signs of proof of life here? And that hasn't happened. The offense and defense are both like really bad. I believe it's like last, I think it is, or something
Right.
to that effect, right? So bottom third and bottom third either way. And this is just a situation that doesn't seem like it's going to get any better anytime soon. Yes, they've had some injuries, nicks and knacks here and there, but when your biggest moves in the offseason are like Torrey Craig, that just kind of show you that things are not going the direction that the Bulls ultimately hoped it would be.
Yeah, so my panic level with the Bulls is I guess a 2-3-ish, somewhere in the middle there. Um I, they are unlike Denny Green, they are exactly who I thought they were. I think we've been saying for the longest time that this roster needs to change, and and for whatever reason they just refuse to change this roster, man. Right? Like they have some nice, dynamic individual pieces, but they have not come together. I think the last real successful opportunity the Bulls had was 2 years ago. And I just think that now you're just seeing this team start to trend downward,
Yeah.
as far as chemistry goes, as far as playability goes. Guys like Vucevic seems like as an afterthought when a couple of years ago we were talking about them as talking about him as like a top 5, 6, 7 big in the NBA, right? And while Zach LaVine, he posts numbers, we were more concerned about his health and we were concerned about his play. Now he's become a disgruntled, player. And while, this whole thing about Billy Donovan, when has that never been the case? It was like that with Oklahoma City Thunder. How long did he stay the coach, for the Oklahoma City Thunder before, they finally parted ways with him? So, he is going to be who he is. I think that he's just not enamored with the roster that I think he would like to work with. And that's nothing against, guys like DeRozan and Levine, because when they came into the NBA, they weren't being coached by Donovan. You know what I'm saying? And so they just have a different mentality and a different approach. And yet you're expecting Donovan to get these guys to play cohesively together. I will say that the major impact to this and all of it is because of the loss of Lonzo Ball, you know? And so I think that until that ever gets right, we're going to always question what the potential of this team could have been if Lonzo Ball was fully healthy for this team and directing this team. And maybe in some respects, you were probably seeing the best ball of Lonzo through Billy Donovan, which then I think was helping to kind of permeate through the rest of the team, with DeRozan and Levine and with Vucevic. But without him, Donovan is a lost voice. I think those guys have already checked out. I don't think that they really buy into this idea that they're going to be competitive. And if you look at the Central Division, minus the Detroit Pistons, who we actually had more higher hopes on than the Chicago Bulls, and the disappointment of what's been going on with Detroit, which we'll talk about in a minute, is only giving cover to the fact that they're never going to compete with the Pacers, let alone with, the Bucks, and even the Cavaliers and things of that nature. So it just feels like this team is on a downward slope, and I can't necessarily feel panicked by it because this roster should have been, kind of refurbished already, and it hasn't been. And I think now they're just going to have to deal with it until something happens by the trade deadline.
Well, I mean, I think that's interesting, right? Because I think when your assessment comes from what your level of expectation is, and it's hard not to have that. Mine is probably coming from what their level of expectation was, right?
Right.
So if I'm the Chicago Bulls, I'm at a 3, and I'm like, all right, this is time now where we seriously have to take a hard look in the mirror and figure out this. We're at the fork in the road, and what are we going to do? Everybody who is smart, if you will, in basketball says Levine is not their biggest asset. Vucevic isn't their biggest asset. DeRozan isn't even. It's actually Caruso, just kind of a plug and play guy who come off your bench, do the dirty work, et cetera, et cetera. And I agree with that assessment. I think, but if you're looking to make a splash, Caruso is probably not the splash. Well, he's not the splash, but what teams need a Levine? What teams need a DeRozan? The Dallas is kicking around the tires on potentially bringing Vucevic over there. And apparently Luka's blessed it if they were to cut it, go ahead and do that. Chicago just needs to figure out who they want to be. Can they sell off these assets and get in the rebuild? And if Billy Donovan is the guy who is going to lead them through that rebuild too, those are all questions I think they need to answer in short order. There's no reason to let midnight oil burn here. Just make the decision here and start to sell off these assets and get what you can here to start your rebuild, which I think is in dire need. And we're both agreement in that.
It's
capacity.
interesting that the Dallas Mavericks have a high level of interest in Vucevic, which I think is actually a good play. I think that Doncic can do well having a guy like Vucevic. I even think Kyrie Irving can do well having a guy like Vucevic, on that roster. This team, the Dallas Mavericks, as far as pace and play goes, they're not the fastest, but they work well with what they got. I think if you're the Chicago Bulls, you have
I
to.
like that move for them potentially, and
Yeah.
he's a guy who could obviously he can space the floor, he can post up when you need him to, but he can stay out of the way for Luka if need be, and Kyrie if needed to. So just a
Right.
matter of would he get along with Jason Kidd and play the defense that Kidd would obviously want him to play, but we're not there yet. So Chicago
Not there.
has lots
But
of
I
situations
think the
to
key though is
investigate.
that if you're the Chicago Bulls, you need to start getting athletic. You need to start playing above the rim again because you really shouldn't be expecting that from Zach LaVine. While Zach LaVine is a great player, he's a transition guard. He shoots the basketball more. He does mid-range jumpers more. He's not trying to bully himself down and get into the lane and try to dunk on people the same way that he did in the early part of his years. And you really don't have anybody with that level of explosiveness on that roster. So if you're the Chicago Bulls, I really think that that's something that you can consider if you're trying to move pieces. They've got to get younger. They got to get athletic. They got to start matching up with the type of teams that they're dealing with in their own conference right now, which is a much more athletically inclined backcourt oriented rosters that are in the Eastern Conference. That's just me. All right, Shaw. So let's go ahead and transition to the Detroit Pistons real quick. What in the hell happened to this team, bro? Like, and I, um, eh, and now seeing the struggles that this team is going through, what will be your panic level, with regards to the Pistons and even Monty Williams and who he is as a coach and what this team is going through?
Yeah, so I'm going to keep this one in that same range, at probably a 3. I think in the early going, they have a similar story to Memphis where they haven't
Mhm.
really been healthy. So a lot of guys, again, have missed time. You can run down the list between Isaiah Stewart to Jaden Ivey to Alec Burks to Jalen Duren. Why like they've all missed time. Joe Harris is still out, and God knows when he'll be back. They picked Kevin Knox off the scrap heap, from the Portland Trailblazers, insert him into the starting lineup for a couple of days. Bogdanovich hasn't played a game. Like there's a lot that's happened to Detroit. So if you lose the Memphis thing, that's the qualifying situation to it. And they've had some nice spots. I think Ozir Thompson has been brilliant for them in the minutes that he's gotten. And Killian Hayes, to a lesser degree, is continuing to show a little bit of growth and spark. But Cade has been inconsistent. And they don't have an identity with all these bigs. And that was, I think, everyone's concern going into this. Like, what are you doing with Stewart and Bagley and Jalen Duren and White? Like, how are all these guys going to carve out minutes? And the way it's happened is because they haven't all been healthy at the same time. That's how it's worked out. So to me, the Pistons have a logjam that they ultimately need to figure out in a style of play that they want to figure out, who is that other guard alongside Cade? Is it Hayes or is it Jaden Ivey? And those things need to be figured out in short order here, because while we're not expecting the Pistons to be world beaters, we're expecting a semblance of growth from them, a step of growth. And that is what's disconcerting about that. Here, as we record tonight, they just lost to the just as lowly Washington Wizards, and they got ran out the building on their home floor against the Wizards. That's a bad loss. I know it's two bad teams, but you got blown out by the Wizards on your home floor. Detroit is definitely in arrears here. And it's interesting, while we all laud Monty Williams, for his coaching acumen, it hasn't translated here in the early part of the season. So blame the injuries if you want to, but I'm really concerned about what's happening in Detroit.
So I'm really concerned about what's happening in Detroit. I probably wouldn't have given it much thought because it's Monty Williams' first year, but I remember when we had our show and your eyebrows, I've never seen your eyebrows go like, I mean, seriously, you could have been doing the rock impersonations. You know what I'm saying? When you saw the news flash about the money Monty Williams received, being donned the head coach for the Detroit Pistons. And while I liked the idea because I just felt that they needed to move off of, Dwayne Casey, and I don't think that there was much that he can do any longer with the roster and then the way that the team is being kind of built up and structured. I wasn't expecting what I'm seeing here. Now, maybe in the first couple of games there was a level of competitiveness that made us buy into that. Maybe you're seeing like, it's like Monty is already having an instant effect. But this team, the way they're losing, bro, it's not even Monty-esque in the way that they're losing.
Yeah.
Or is it? Or is it? You know what I'm saying? Here where I'm coming from. We had instant gratification with the way Monty Williams coached up the Phoenix Suns in the during the COVID time, right? In the bubble. During the bubble time. But when Monty Williams got to the playoffs, his teams didn't just lose. Like, they got shellacked. And while they did get to the NBA Finals, we talked more about how badly they got exited, they got booted out of the playoffs than we had about the run that they had getting to the NBA Finals. And to me, that storyline is continually happening now with Monty Williams. It's carrying with him a little bit. So I want to say, yes, I want to give him time so that he can kind of really work with this roster and let us see whether or not that the imprint is finally going to be there. And I think, to your point, the health situation is going to play a major factor in whether or not he's going to have the pillars of leadership that he needs to really help this team come together and compete. But it's how this team isn't competing that I think concerns me more than anything. And that to me is part of the problem. Like, you could see this team would be instantly better defensively. They're actually worse defensively than what they showed, from last year. And I don't know how that makes any sense when Monty Williams' calling card has been teams will improve their defensive effort. The losses I can understand can come, but it's the blowouts that I think can't be explained, especially if you've got guys who have a certain, like, you're playing under Monty Williams, there's an expectation. I mean, we all know how he's been with DeAndre Ayton, right? And a lot of guys who had received, quote unquote, the special treatment as far as being lottery pick roster type players. He doesn't have to work with that. He's got guys that I really think want to be in the NBA, that want to play, and I think they're playing hard for him, but it's not translating into anything that means that they're going to be competitive when they're playing against good teams or even decent teams. And then they get blown out by the Wizards. It's just inexplicable. You know what I mean? Like, that's if Jordan Poole should be the only person that you're worried about, and everyone else shouldn't look great. Everyone seemed to look great in this game against the Wizards. You know what I'm saying? Just simply because the Detroit Pistons didn't come out to play today, and that's just not indicative of a Monty Williams coach team.
Yeah. Well, I'll close with this. Figure out what's going on with the big rotation, whatever that is. Obviously, got to get guys healthy. I think at this stage, there's no reason for them to hold on to Bogdanovich if you're just looking to try to keep the proverbial dolt in the room. Sure, I guess Joe Harris can probably fill that role here now. I would trade Bogdanovich, see if you can get some assets there, and now really try to figure out who is the co-star next to Cade, because you look down this roster, right? And we don't always need to just look at points, but it's the easiest thing to look at. They have a bunch of guys averaging somewhere between 10 to 12 points per game. Cade's at 22, but nobody in that even 12 to 7 or 13 to 17. Everybody else 12, 12, 11, 10, 10. It's just certainly by committee. And I think that can work to a certain degree, but there has to be some sort of role delineation here, and somebody needs to step up. And maybe Bogdanovich would be that guy if he was healthy, but I just don't think he's the answer here for the Pistons long term. So make this a year of development, see how you can develop Ivy, continue to develop Duren, and obviously Azir Thompson as well too, and then see how that.
I think Thompson's that guy. I think Thompson's that guy. I think he has a potential, I wanted it. I really was hoping it'd probably be Jaden Ivey, because I really would like to see that kind of backcourt combination, but it's hard to say. And I don't know if that's partly because of, again, different coaching, mindset, mentality with Monty Williams, and who he's leaning on and who he's actually working, what I'm saying, his offense through, so to speak, as primaries and following, suit. So, all right, Shaw. A lot more to get into, but before we do that, we got to make sure we do this proper plug, right? So it's for all of our NBA heads. If you are looking for the ultimate destination for NBA gear, look no further than the NBA store. With a huge selection of authentic and high quality products, including jerseys, hats, and accessories, the NBA store has everything you need to show off your team pride. Plus, with exclusive limited edition items, you can make your collection truly one of a kind. And with an online presence, you can shop from anywhere in the world. Don't miss out on the latest trends and experiences. Visit the NBA store today by clicking on our affiliate link. If you're listening to us on your favorite audio platform, be sure to check the link in the description of the show. The Baseline is working in affiliation with the NBA store/Fanatics and will be compensated for your patronage by utilizing our link. And as always, we thank you for your support. More Baseline with Callie Warren Shaw. Don't go away. All right, we're back. Callie Warren Shaw, Baseline NBA podcast, and we're continuing our panic level assessment. A couple more that we wanted to kind of chime in on here, Shaw. Let's talk about the Phoenix Suns, aka the Desert Mash Unit. So the Phoenix Suns' health, more than anything, is quite the conundrum. I'm sure that we have the top surgeons and doctors, in the world, trying to do the math, trying to figure out the science of what it's going to take in order to get, Frank Vogel's roster fully healthy for at least one game in the NBA season, right? Because I think by all accounts, I think there's only been one game in which Bradley Beal, Devin Booker, and Kevin Durant have managed to be on the basketball court.
There's been no games where that has occurred.
Oh, there's been no games. Okay.
No regular season games.
I was trying to be nice about it, but I appreciate you keeping it 100. My God, I mean, Yusuf Nurkic has played probably more games than all of them, right? So what do we make of this situation? Where do you put the panic level when we talk about the Phoenix Suns health?
So I bring it up only because it's something to have a conversation about. The Suns are 11-6, and they figured out a way. Durant is having one of his better seasons, in not quite some time, but in some time. Booker's only played 9 games. Beal hasn't played. Bill has played 3 games, but none of these games have coincide with the 3 of them together. So with 11-6 record, it's hard to be overly concerned. So I'm calm, but I have no faith that these 3 will be available when it comes playoff time altogether. And I think that's where the concern comes about. They at some point will form like Voltron to play here in the regular season together, but it just seems inevitable that one or two or all three may be down at some point in the playoffs, and that's what they formed together to do. You are having to rely on guys like, Bates Jop and Okogie and even Drew Eubanks to a lesser degree to play some significant minutes for this team. And those are okay players, but it's just really interesting to see how this trio, which I myself and many out there were lauding as potentially the greatest offense of all time, to be almost 20 games in, and we haven't seen not one time all three guys play together. But to their credit, with two of those guys at any given moment, this team is still fifth in offensive rating, and Booker and Durant are almost averaging 30 apiece. So that's why I'm calm on it, but I think it's still worth a conversation.
So I think the question for me has always been, who is going to take this team to the next level? And it's hard for anybody to make that, you know, to assess that when you really don't have all of the players um, competing, where you can be able to determine if whether that's going to happen or not happen. The other thing too, as well, is that, to me is, I've said someone's got to play like they're the MVP of this team or the MVP of this league. I think we've been waiting to see that from Devin Booker for quite some time. Part of the problem is because he can't stay healthy, he seems to take himself out of that running, so to speak. I think we build him up a lot because of the fact that, his scoring potential, and he's an exciting basketball player, and he's been the pillar for the Phoenix Suns, for quite some time. But the problem is he doesn't stay on the court long enough for us to put him in the same ilk as Joel Embiid or, any other particular player who we've seen has been, ravaged by injury, so to speak, that has cut that timeline short of their ability to be in the MVP conversation. So then it goes back to who's your most reliable player, that typically will show up when it matters the most. And, all arrows point towards Kevin Durant. So, with that being said, I think all of this is predicated on how much of Kevin Durant plays this NBA season. If Kevin Durant is on that basketball court for a good portion of the games that the Phoenix Suns play, the Phoenix Suns will be continually a dangerous basketball team because you can have either Booker or you can have Beal, one of those two. And I think as that combination, they'll be the most dangerous. I buy that more than I buy into all three of them being on the basketball court at the same time because unfortunately, they haven't been together long enough and they can't stay on the court healthy enough for us to be able to properly assess if whether or not this trifecta that they have is the most effective trifecta to have to win a championship. Not about winning the regular season games, but just winning a championship.
Well, I'll
And
say
so my
this.
my 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 panic level is, to me, is a 3, only because of that part of it. The question is never going to truly be answered for me because I'm believing that it's supposed to be Devin Booker's team and he's supposed to be the man, but he's never going to play like that if he's not going to be on the court for the requisite number of games that gives us that belief.
Well, when he's there, he's hooping. I mean, almost
Yeah,
30
yeah,
and
again,
9 right now.
right.
So it's gaudy in the 9 games he has played, and hit a game winner against the Knicks here, not too long ago. My thing is Beal. It felt like overkill and kind of superfluous, and I think it may ultimately turn out to be exactly that. They can still make a good run, I think, with Booker and Durant, being the lead guys there, and Beal be more of a complementary guy. But a lot of what was discussed was Beal was going to end up coming and basically becoming the de facto point guard and setting people up, where Booker is clearly better suited to that and can still get his shot off. So I'll be interested to see now if that role delineation has kind of reared its head by virtue of circumstance and availability of these three guys, or Booker does just continue to run the offense. And Beal is like, listen, hey, I'll spot up and, maybe I'll be the backup point guard in this situation. Or does it become an issue at some point where they need somebody to really set all three of them up? Can they find somebody else, to add to this roster? But right now they're doing okay, doing better than okay, 11-6. So not quite the blistering start we thought they might have had offensively, but it's been adequate enough despite not being all three guys on the floor at any point this season.
Well, I think the key is going to be whether or not this team will improve defensively, and the the elevation of their role players. So like
That's funny.
the Josh Okogis and those
I
dudes,
think they've been
Eric
okay
Gordon.
defensively because they haven't had Beal out there. So I mean, they're like 17th, 19th, something like that. Defensive
Yeah.
rating, not great, right? But I would expect that to probably drop, into 25 if Beal and you're just going to kill it with offense as we expected them to do. So because you've had some more of those grunt guys in there, the defense hasn't been quite as bad as I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, but but again, to your point, Shaw, it's going to be which team is going to give them that work, right? Which team is going to be able to stay with them toe for toe, and then what do? You're going to have to eventually get some stops somehow. You're going to have to find somebody that's going to have to be able to take that pressure off of the Beals and Bookers and the Kevin Durant's, because they're not going to be defending for 48 minutes, man. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah,
That's not what they came. That's not what they signed up for. That's not what they're going to try to do. So even if their best intentions is to outscore whoever the other team is, it still comes down to if the other team has the same weaponry as you, they just don't have names like Booker, Beal, or Durant, and they're doing what those three are doing, somebody's going to have to stop them. And I have more faith that the other team has more players that can do that than I think the Phoenix Suns have,
that's
because
crazy. The
collectively,
unnamed other team.
yeah, yeah, you know
Wow.
what I'm saying? What do they call them? Co-conspirator,
Jeez.
unco-conspirator, Jane Doe, John Doe, whatever you want to call it. All right, y'all. Finally, last one that we want to do our panic assessment level here is the Pascal Siakam
Hold
with
on.
the
No, we
Toronto
skipped
Raptors.
Jordan Poole. We got to go there.
Oh, we got to
So
go Jordan Poole.
yeah,
Sorry, my bad. I forgot. JP, we said yes, you're right. We were supposed to talk about Jordan Poole. What is your panic level assessment on Jordan Poole as being the head honcho for the Washington Wizards?
severe, severe. This is not a guy who I think the Wizards were expecting to get, and it's not even about he's not averaging 25 a game. Like I thought, a lot of us thought, people thought he was going to be 30 a game. I remember KG said, "Oh, it's going to be like James Harden going to Houston." Maybe that was not maybe that was extremely lofty. And KG has since retracted on that and said Jordan Poole should
Okay,
probably be out of the league.
the league.
But
Yeah, I was
to
going to
be at
mention that part.
but to be at 17 a game at 16 shots, yet still a career high. He averaged 15.6 last year in Golden State, but 16.2, like he seems listless, like he doesn't really care. And that to me, I think is the problem. So it's credit to him. He's not out here just jacking up 20 to 25 shots a game. Like I thought all
He
of
is
us,
jacking up some shots, though. It's just some
well,
interesting shot selection. He's
Poole going Poole, right?
right.
So the shot selection, even in those 16s, has still not haven't been great, but it hasn't been the volume that many of us thought was going to be in play. But and the percentages, just 39% from two and 28% from three. Who is this guy? Like I just don't understand. And I think from this why it's severe, there was all this conversation about he and Kuzma trying to co-lead and being young guys who've won NBA championships. So they know what it is now to try to come here and try to build some semblance of culture. I think Kuzma is playing at a certain level, and yeah, they're just out here getting some numbers to some degree, but you have to be setting some semblance of a tone, and that is not happening. And I think Jordan Poole has been like the antithesis of a culture setter here in Washington. Not even really trying that hard on either side of the basketball, and you thought for sure he'd at least try offensively. That's not even happening. So that's why I think this is severe. And I don't remember, it was an aggregate account, so I'm not going to take this as law. But I did see it somewhere, it was like, oh, the Wizards are unhappy with how things have gone and would consider moving him already. Um, I don't know how true that is, but I wouldn't be surprised if there is teeth to that, because it's been abysmal for I think what anybody expected Jordan Poole to be able to do this year.
Well, it's not good when we're talking about what the optics really look like than what the record reflects. Because everybody knew that the Washington Wizards was going to struggle as a basketball team, because
Right.
we really still don't understand the makeup of this roster. But when you have a play, like when you make movements in the offseason like the Washington Wizards did in getting a guy like Jordan Poole, your expectation is that there's supposed to be some level of excitement of having him on that roster and seeing him out there playing basketball. There's nothing about what Jordan Poole is doing that is exciting anybody and that is making anybody buy into the idea that the Washington Wizards are serious about competing in basketball.
Let me
You know
let
what I
me
mean?
interject real quick, because
Yeah.
I'm going to back up your point here as well too. The reason how I know what you're saying is true, because even as bad as they are, he's averaging 29.8 minutes. He's just under 30. He averaged 30 in Golden State for the last 2 years. You would figure, with it being quote unquote his team, that even his coach, Wes Unseld Jr., would be like, listen, bro, go out here and do this. Expect those numbers to be at least 34, 35 minutes a night. Not
Right.
even. His coach doesn't even trust him to just let him go out there, because he sees that the effort is not there. And that to me is a huge, huge problem if you're the Washington Wizards.
It's a huge problem, and I just the reason why I agree with you that this is a severe level because if you're Wes Unseld Jr., you have to watch yourself, right? Do you become compromised because this player who's already secured in his bag, so to speak, and he's locked in, right? There's no restructuring of the contract for the next couple of years. This is what you're going to have to deal with. So you either flood your roster with other players that as a coach you can focus your attention on and phase him out slowly, or you've got to figure out a way to turn this around, which I don't know how you're going to be able to do that because the roster that you've been set up with has not been set up for success. So it's a really tough situation. I feel bad for Wes Unseld Jr. because I do think that there's potential there for him if he can figure out a way to help turn this around. My God, you should, I would even consider him a Coach of the Year candidate for what we're seeing here, because what the product is at right now is not reflective of what the expectations were when these moves are being done in the offseason, being spearheaded by a guy like Jordan Poole.
Yeah, again, you have to at least try, and that hasn't happened. I think even Tyus Jones has been, it can buy a lot of people's accounts, best backup in the league, so getting a chance to start. It hasn't been as great as I think many people would have thought it was going to be. I'm trying to find, a positive for this Wizards team just in general. Maybe Denny Avdiva, he's been okay, I guess. Gafford as the lone center hasn't really translated, but it all circles back, I think, to Poole and Kuzma being the leaders of this team, not only in name, but I think in actuality of it. So do they need some semblance of another veteran guy there? I mean, Gallo's there, and Mike Muscala's there as a veteran presence, but I don't know what type of voices they have in the locker room. So they were trying to build through the combination of Poole and Kuzma, and it's gone abysmally to start the season.
Absolutely. All right, Shaw. Finally, let's talk about Pascal Siakam now. maybe not, maybe not as bad as the Jordan Poole situation, but Pascal Siakam in his panic level assessment, where do you have him?
Yeah, it's a three. I'm concerned from the aspect of, like, I know he wants his contract. Lots of conversation about him being moved. He's down 4 points per game. I mean, he's still averaging 20, but he was averaging 24 last year, so that's pretty significant. You can say yes, the rise of Scotty Barnes is maybe contributing to that to some degree, and Jakob Poeltl being there for the entirety of the season. But to me, it's just the Raptors continue to be just strange. And there's not a real path for what they ultimately want to do. And I think it's translating in his play on the court, where he's just trying to figure out, like, all right, well, what am I really going to do here? Am I going to be here long term? New coach in the system as well too. So trying to figure all of that out. I think Dennis Schroeder's been pleasantly decent for them at the point guard situation, maybe taking more shots than Siakam would potentially like. But I mean, that's no different than having, I guess, Fred VanVleet there, although VanVleet's obviously better than Schroeder, but the shot diet is still, comparable compared to last year. So I'm concerned about Siakam and just trying to figure out where he's sitting in the land of the Raptors in terms of their long-term plans. And I think that's messing with his mental a little bit.
I'm going to give this one a 2. I think it's mild, but I do think that as we get to the end of the year, Shaw, I think we'll probably learn a lot more about where Siakam is going to be in the pecking order, as it pertains to the appetite for him, whether or not it's to come back to the Toronto Raptors. The Toronto Raptors want him, or if they're going to be teams who, uh, other suitors or who are going to want, Pascal Siakam. It's interesting when you got a guy who averages about 20 points per game, 20, you be chomping at the bit. Like, what do we got to do in order to get this guy on the roster? We got to figure out a way to make it fit. But Pascal Siakam has been an anomaly in some speaks. He came out like gangbusters, definitely wowed some heads. And then all of a sudden, a lot of who he is, how he was, is just very tempered, which is unbecoming of a player like Siakam who works so hard to establish himself I kind of had him in the fold of someone like a Serge Ibaka, with the way that he was grinding to get himself the reputation that I thought he deserved for what
Yeah.
he's doing. But now I feel like he's just resting on his laurels, and I don't know if whether or not part of it is just where he is, and how the team was structured, and him just not really finding his space, so to speak. But I fear that if he doesn't turn things around, even if he has an opportunity to go elsewhere, he may get some money, but I do think that he would have to be accepting of the fact that he's no longer in the pecking in that conversation when we talk about top 10 you know um swing bigs, that is sought after, that level of versatility is there. I think everyone is going to look at him singularly. He's like a 2B type player, maybe. What I'm saying, I'm probably being generous when I say 2B. I think he could probably wind up being a 3 on a roster trifecta, so to speak. You know what I mean? And so
Yeah.
I don't think that that's where he thinks that he feels like he needs to be. And maybe he believes that being in Toronto, that's what it's going to look like or feel like. But he's not helping himself with the way that he's been struggling. And I hope that, if the Toronto Raptors have any expectation of being competitive in this Eastern Conference, he's going to have to be back to his 24 point per game level, so to speak. But more importantly, he just has to have more of an impact on that team, which there are opportunities to do so. Scotty Barnes is not, fully developed. Jakob Poeltl, I think, is he's serviceable, but he's by
Yeah,
no
and
means
yeah,
a
I mentioned
solution.
Jakob only in the
Yeah,
aspect of the
yeah,
rebounds and probably the putbacks and things that are happening there that Siakam might ordinarily get from a rebounding standpoint. So his
right.
rebounds are down, which you could maybe expect with a guy like Pirtle being there for the entire of
But
the
we're
season.
talking about OG and Anobi more than we're talking about
Well, that's
Pascal
another one too.
Siakam.
So I mean,
But
well,
but that's
I
what
mean,
I'm saying. It's interesting, like once Van Fleet has gone, and there's no longer what used to be the what I'm saying, the championship iteration of the Toronto Raptors. It's these guys that are still on this roster, and there's this opening, there's this opportunity, and yet it just doesn't seem like anybody wants to put their foot through the door and walk in.
yeah, I'll leave it on a positive note. He is shooting 49%, so that's up from 48% last year. So that's a positive.
A one
But
percent incremental.
yeah,
That'll
but
allow
three
me
less
to
shots.
that'll Oh, okay. That'll
Yeah.
allow me to lower the panic level down to 1
All right.
now.
He might be a victim of not only circumstance, but I think again maybe his mental getting into the way a little bit here in terms of the instability that he's facing there. But they do have a new system, obviously with a new coach there as well too.
Yeah, that very much could be, but at least it's not pompous circumstance like our man
Hey,
Jordan Poole.
all right.
Anyway, awesome show this week, Shaw, man. Good stuff, man. Especially, we got to do this again, man. Panic level assessment. I like this. This is pretty good. Maybe at some point I could figure out a way we can implement Busta's extension level event like you did. You know what I'm saying? Probably play a couple of tracks. You know what I'm
Hey,
saying? Bring
anytime we can
bring.
interject some good hip hop, brother, we down for that.
There's only 5 years left.
Shit, Siakam might only have 5 games left. We'll
5 games
see.
left.
But good times,
Oh,
man. Good
you know
times.
you know what I would be playing if that was happening. I'd be playing Abandoned Ship.
Well, that's the next segment. Again, because it's about that time. We wait till about the 20 to 25 game mark. So, do we
We
talk
got
ish or abandon ship?
Abandoned
So,
Ship. Yeah, yeah.
mhm.
I like that. That one's been missed. We got it. Yeah, we definitely are gonna get ready to put that one on the docket. I
Oh,
like that.
for sure. Probably next week.
Anyway, man, as always, my brother, always awesome being able to sit down and chop it up with you and give the what they say, give the listeners what they won't.
Hey, got to give them what they need.
Gotta give them
And
what they need.
as always, here, great to be back here on the baseline and talking. The true hoops of the association as well too. So shout out again as always to everybody who taps in with us. Again, shout out to those who filled in for me while I was out. But we're back up in the saddle, man. You're going to ride through the rest of this new year and obviously the rest of the regular season as well too. In season tournament coming up here. The finals, semifinals, et cetera, et cetera. I even got the media memo just this afternoon. But hey, you want to come to Vegas? So give us consideration. Maybe go catch up with our old friend Jabari out there in Vegas, man. We'll see what's good.
Oh, because Jabari boy, he be hitting those slot machines hard.
I'm gonna leave it alone. I'm not gonna touch it.
Anyway, as always, everybody who's been tuning in with us, man, again, we appreciate those that have been chiming in for us for the baseline. Callie, Warren Shaw, we appreciate you guys. You know this, and we'll catch up with you next time.